The first time Daniel Cross walked into Harbor Grill, the bell above the door barely made a sound. It was early, just after dawn, when the air still smelled like wet pavement and diesel from the docks. Inside, the diner hummed softly. A coffee machine hissed. Silverware clinked. Someone coughed behind a newspaper. No one looked up when Daniel stepped in, and that was the point. He paused for half a second, letting his eyes adjust to the yellowed lights and cracked vinyl booths. The place felt tired, like it had been awake too long and given up on pretending otherwise. Daniel pulled his jacket closer, the zipper catching halfway before he forced it down. The fabric was thin, faded, chosen carefully. He slid into the corner booth, the one farthest from the window, where the cold glass pressed faintly against his shoulder. From here he could see the whole room without being seen himself. Years of boardrooms and quiet power had taught him that. A laminated menu stuck slightly to the table. He peeled it free, scanned it, then set it down. He already knew what he would order. Footsteps approached. Measured. Not rushed. Morning. The voice was calm, low, without the artificial brightness he was used to hearing in places like this. Daniel looked up. The waitress stood with a small notepad tucked against her palm. She didn't smile. She didn't frown either. Her expression was neutral in a way that felt deliberate. Her uniform fit well but had been washed too many times. At her collar, the stitching was starting to fray. Her name tag read, Elena. Morning, Daniel said. Coffee? Yes. Black. She nodded once and wrote it down. Food? X. Over easy. Wheat toast. Another nod. Efficient. Professional. She turned to leave, then paused. Hash browns? He hesitated, then shook his head. Just the eggs. All right. As she walked away, Daniel noticed the way she moved. Careful. Balanced. Like someone who knew how to carry weight without letting it show. He'd seen that posture before. Not in restaurants. In people who had learned early on that mistakes cost more than pride. The coffee arrived fast. It was too hot. You like that? Elena set the mug down without spilling a drop. I'll bring the rest in a minute. Thanks. She didn't linger. Daniel wrapped his hands around the mug and let the heat sink into his fingers. Outside, a truck groaned past. Inside, the clock above the register ticked too loudly. This was where his mornings would happen now, if everything went according to plan. When the food arrived, Daniel noticed something small. The toast was cut diagonally, not straight down the middle like most places did when they rushed. He ate slowly, watched the room. Elena moved from table to table, never hovering, never disappearing. She remembered refills, anticipated needs. When a man at the counter complained about cold eggs, she listened without interrupting, then took the plate back without argument. Daniel paid in cash and left a tip that was generous but not flashy. As he slid out of the booth, Elena passed by again. You new around here? She asked, not looking at him directly. He smiled. That obvious? She glanced at him now. Her eyes were sharp, observant. I work mornings. Same people mostly. You don't fit. Guess I'll have to work on that, he said. Something flickered across her face. Amusement, maybe. Or curiosity. It was gone just as fast. See you, she said, already turning away. Outside, the cold hit harder. Daniel stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the smell of salt and oil and old wood. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window. He looked like a man with nothing to hide. He walked to his car parked 3 blocks away. Not the one he owned. The one he'd borrowed. The one with the cracked dashboard and the faint smell of cigarettes. As he drove off, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it. Back in the diner, Elena wiped down the corner booth. She paused when she noticed the tip. Just for a second. Then she folded the money and slipped it into her apron like it didn't matter. But it did. Some mornings stayed with you. And if you're the kind of person who notices quiet beginnings like this, you might want to stay. Go ahead and subscribe, because this isn't just a story about a man walking into a diner. It's about what he brought with him, and what he was about to risk losing. As Daniel merged onto the highway, his thoughts drifted not to money or meetings, but to a small girl with dark eyes and a voice he barely heard anymore. He had a plan. What he didn't know yet was how fragile it was, or how quickly it could fall apart. Elena had learned to read a room before most people finished their first cup of coffee. It was a survival skill, not a talent. At Harbor Grill, mornings were predictable in the way storms were predictable. Same tables. Same habits. Same complaints. Men who wanted their eggs exactly how they remembered them from 20 years ago. Women who drank coffee like it was medicine. Everyone carrying something they didn't talk about. She moved through it all with practiced calm. By 6:30 her feet already ached. By 7 the smell of grease clung to her clothes no matter how many times she washed them. By 8 she stopped noticing the ache altogether. She liked mornings because people were honest before noon. Too tired to perform. Too hungry to pretend. That's why she noticed him. Not immediately. Not the moment he walked in. But the second day. He took the same booth. Ordered the same breakfast. Black coffee. Eggs over easy. Wheat toast. No hash browns. Ate slowly. Looked around without staring. People like him usually came with questions. Or excuses. Or a story they were eager to tell. This one didn't. When she refilled his cup, she caught him watching her hands. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable. More like he was paying attention to details most people ignored. "You want more coffee?" she asked. "Yes," he said, then added, "Please?" The word landed softly. Like it wasn't a habit but a choice. She poured. "You work around here?" He shook his head. "No. Just nearby." That pause again. Brief. Careful. She nodded and moved on. Elena didn't ask follow-up questions. She never did. Curiosity had burned her before. People told you things you couldn't unhear. Things that changed how you saw them. She preferred clean lines. Orders in, orders out. Still, when she cleared his plate, she noticed he'd eaten everything. No waste. No fuss. The third morning he came in looking tired. Not the normal tired. This was the kind that sat behind the eyes and didn't go away with caffeine. His shoulders slumped a little more. His hair stuck out in places like he hadn't bothered fixing it. "You okay?" she asked, surprising herself. He blinked like he hadn't expected anyone to notice. "Yeah. Just didn't sleep much." She waited. He didn't elaborate. She nodded. "Coffee helps." "A little." That morning she brought him an extra piece of toast. She didn't mention it. Just set it down and walked away. He noticed. "Hey," he called softly. She turned. "You didn't charge me for this." She shrugged. "Kitchen made too much." They both knew that wasn't true. He smiled then. Not wide. Just enough to show gratitude without embarrassment. Elena walked back to the counter and felt something tighten in her chest. She ignored it. She always did. During her break, she sat near the back, scrolling through her phone without really seeing it. Her manager's voice echoed from the kitchen, sharp and impatient. A delivery truck rumbled outside. She thought about her son. It happened sometimes without warning. A smell. A sound. The way the sun hit the counter just right. She didn't fight it anymore. Fighting made it worse. When her break ended, she tied her apron tighter and went back out. The man was still there, reading a folded newspaper someone had left behind. "You don't have to rush," she said. "We're not busy." "I know," he said. "I like it here." "Most people don't," she replied. "That's probably why." She studied him for a second. "You coming back tomorrow?" "If that's okay." She nodded. "Same time." "Yeah." That night, Elena went home to her small apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin. Someone argued 2 doors down. The dryer hummed endlessly below her feet. She heated leftover soup and ate standing up. Later, as she lay in bed, she thought about the man in the corner booth. About the way he listened. About the way he didn't try to impress her. She told herself it meant nothing. The next morning he was already there when she arrived. Same booth. Same jacket. But this time when she brought his coffee he said something different. "My name's Daniel." She paused, pen hovering above her notepad. "Elena," she said, though it was already on her chest. They looked at each other for a moment longer than necessary. Neither of them knew it yet, but something had shifted. And once it did, it wouldn't shift back. Daniel learned early in his career that the best disguises weren't elaborate. They were boring. The jacket he wore to Harbor Grill came from a discount rack 2 towns over. He'd chosen it because it looked like it had been owned before him. The boots were scuffed on purpose. Not too much. Just enough to suggest long days and little reward. Even the way he walked was measured. No confidence that drew attention. No hesitation that invited pity. He practiced it. In the mirror of the small apartment he rented near the docks, Daniel studied himself every morning like an actor rehearsing a role he couldn't afford to get wrong. He made sure his shoulders slouched slightly. That his voice stayed level, never commanding. That he didn't say things like, "I'll take care of it," or, "That's unacceptable." Words he used without thinking in his real life. Here he was just another man getting by. The apartment itself helped. It was on the second floor of a narrow building squeezed between a pawn shop and a closed-down travel agency. The stairs creaked. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old carpet. He'd furnished it sparsely. A used couch. A small table. 1 chair. No art on the walls. Nothing that suggested permanence. He kept his real phone turned off while he was there. Every morning before leaving he checked the locks twice. Not because he was afraid of being robbed. Because habits were hard to break. Security had been his responsibility for years. Letting it go felt like stepping outside without shoes. As he drove to the diner in the borrowed car, Daniel reminded himself why he was doing this. Lila. The thought of her tightened something in his chest every time. At home, the real home, her bedroom was painted a soft blue she'd chosen herself before everything changed. The walls were still decorated with drawings she'd made years ago. Animals with crooked legs. Houses with smoke curling from the chimneys. He'd stopped adding new ones to the wall because there weren't any. Doctors had explanations. Specialists had charts. Everyone had theories. Daniel had tried all of them. He'd hired caregivers with impressive resumes. Women who spoke gently and followed protocols. Men who were patient and calm. They all lasted a few weeks. A month at most. Lila never connected. And eventually they grew frustrated. Or uncomfortable. Or bored. They always left politely. Money made it easy to replace them. That was the problem. No one stayed long enough to matter. So Daniel started wondering what would happen if the truth wasn't the first thing people saw. If the house wasn't big. If the job title didn't come with expectations. If someone met him as a man first. A father second. Everything else last. It wasn't a proud thought. It felt calculated. Even manipulative. He told himself it was temporary. Just a test. But tests had consequences. At Harbor Grill, he watched Elena through that lens. Not as a potential partner. Not even as a solution. Just as a person. He paid attention to how she handled stress. How she responded to complaints. How she treated people who couldn't give her anything in return. When a customer snapped at her for forgetting a side of bacon, she didn't apologize excessively. She corrected it. Moved on. No resentment. No false cheer. That mattered to him more than kindness that performed for approval. One morning, as he stirred sugar into his coffee, Daniel almost mentioned his work without thinking. He caught himself just in time. "What do you do?" Elena asked casually while wiping the table. "Whatever pays," he said. It wasn't a lie. Not entirely. She nodded, accepting the answer without digging. That restraint felt like a gift. As the days passed, Daniel felt the strain of the lie settling in. It was subtle. A tightening in his jaw when his phone vibrated. A pause before answering simple questions. The constant awareness of what not to say. He wondered if Elena noticed. People always noticed more than you wanted them to. That afternoon, back in the apartment, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the blank wall. He thought about the line he was walking, about how easy it would be to step off it, to bring Elena into the real world he lived in and explain everything. But then he imagined Lila's silence stretching on for years. He picked up his jacket for the next morning, smoothed the wrinkles, wore the lie again like a coat, and told himself he was strong enough to carry it. He didn't yet understand how heavy it would become, or how close it already was to slipping. Lila's silence didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, like dust settling in a room no one used anymore. At first it was small things. One-word answers. Shrugs instead of explanations. Daniel noticed, but he told himself it was a phase. Children changed. They adapted. That was what everyone said. Then came the morning that split his life into before and after. Lila's mother had been standing in the kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, humming under her breath while stirring oatmeal. The radio played softly in the background. Nothing dramatic. Nothing urgent. Just an ordinary weekday morning. Daniel had been tying his shoes when he heard the bowl hit the floor. The sound was sharp. Wrong. By the time he reached the kitchen, she was already on the ground. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing him. Lila stood frozen near the doorway, her small hands clenched into fists so tight her knuckles had turned pale. Daniel remembered shouting her name. Remembered dropping to his knees. Remembered Lila screaming. That scream lived inside him still. The doctors later used words like sudden and unavoidable. They spoke gently, as if volume might soften reality. Daniel nodded through it all, signing forms he didn't remember reading. Lila didn't cry at the hospital. She didn't cry at the funeral either. She stood next to Daniel, holding his hand, her face blank in a way that frightened him more than tears ever could. After that, the house changed. It became too quiet, too large. Every room echoed with absence. Daniel tried to keep routines. Breakfast at the same time. School drop-offs. Bedtime stories, even when Lila stared past the pages like the words had lost meaning. She spoke less and less. At school, teachers said she was reserved, well-behaved. They meant she didn't cause trouble. They didn't mean she was okay. At home, she stopped answering questions altogether. Daniel tried therapists, specialists, child psychologists with framed degrees and kind eyes. They asked him about his work schedule, about discipline, about grief. They asked Lila questions too. She stared at the floor. One therapist suggested drawing. Another suggested journaling. A third suggested medication, carefully phrased as if saying it too clearly might make Daniel flinch. He tried everything. Nothing stayed. The nannies came next. They were all qualified. Some overly so. They brought charts and plans and brightly colored calendars. Others tried to bond too quickly, showering Lila with attention she didn't want. Lila tolerated them politely. Then she withdrew. They always quit. One cried in the kitchen and apologized. Another said she felt unequipped. A third simply didn't come back after lunch. Daniel stopped being surprised. At night, after Lila fell asleep, he walked the halls of his house like a ghost. He stood outside her door longer than he admitted to himself, listening for any sound, any proof she was still reaching outward. Sometimes she whispered in her sleep. He never understood the words. One evening, after another long day of silence, Daniel sat on the floor of Lila's room with his back against the bed. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He just stayed there until the light from the hallway faded. He wondered when love had started to feel like failure. Money didn't help. It made things worse. Everyone assumed he could fix this, that resources meant answers. They didn't. The morning after Lila refused to speak at all, not even to say she was hungry, Daniel sat in his car and stared at the steering wheel until his vision blurred. He thought about the woman at the diner, the one who listened more than she spoke, the one who didn't try to fix things. The thought surprised him. He shook it off. This wasn't about that. This was about his daughter. Still, when he walked into Harbor Grill the next morning, his shoulders were heavier, his steps slower. The lie he wore felt thinner, stretched. Elena noticed immediately. "You look exhausted," she said quietly as she poured his coffee. He almost told her everything. Almost. Instead, he nodded and stared into the dark liquid, wondering how much longer his daughter could disappear before he lost her completely, and whether the answer he was looking for was closer than he realized, or already slipping past him unnoticed. Breakfast at Harbor Grill became a routine before Daniel realized he was relying on it. The place didn't change much from day to day. The same cracked booth seats. The same faint smell of burned toast that never fully went away. The same radio station playing softly behind the counter, cycling through songs nobody really listened to. That predictability mattered more than he wanted to admit. So did Elena. She learned his timing before she learned his habits. By the time he slid into the corner booth, his coffee was already on the warmer. She didn't ask any more. Just brought it over, set it down, and moved on like it was nothing special. But Daniel noticed. He noticed the way she always placed the mug with the handle facing him. The way she checked the cream levels at other tables before anyone asked. The way she avoided unnecessary conversation but never felt cold. They spoke in fragments. Small observations. Comments about the weather. A shared glance when someone complained about a plate that was clearly fine. Once, when a regular spilled coffee all over the table and cursed loudly, Elena handed him a stack of napkins without reacting. "Happens," she said. The man calmed instantly. Daniel watched that closely. Authority without volume. Calm without distance. It reminded him of something he couldn't place. One morning he came in earlier than usual. The diner was nearly empty, the windows fogged over from the cold outside. Elena was wiping down the counter. "You're early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." She nodded like she understood too well. "Coffee?" "Yes." She poured and leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise. "Kids?" she asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. "What?" She gestured toward the door, where a woman was trying to usher two sleepy boys inside. "Parents come in early. Easier before school." Daniel hesitated. He could have deflected. He'd done it before. Instead, the truth slipped out unplanned. "Yeah," he said. "One." Elena looked at him, her expression unreadable. "How old?" "7." She nodded. "That's a hard age." Something in her tone told him she wasn't guessing. "Why?" he asked. She shrugged. "They're old enough to remember things. Young enough not to understand them." Daniel felt the words land heavy. He took a breath. "She doesn't sleep much." Elena didn't offer advice. She didn't suggest solutions. She simply refilled his cup and said, "Neither do a lot of adults." That morning when she brought his plate, there was an extra piece of toast again. This time she didn't bother explaining it away. "Thanks," he said quietly. She nodded once. "Eat." As the weeks passed, something subtle changed. Daniel found himself looking forward to the mornings. Not for the food. Not even for the quiet. For the feeling that someone noticed him without needing him to explain himself. Elena started sitting across from him during slow moments. Not for long. A minute here. 30 seconds there. They didn't talk about anything important. But the silence felt different. One morning, Daniel came in soaked from the rain. His jacket clung to him, heavy and cold. "You want to hang that by the heater?" Elena asked, pointing toward the back. "That okay?" She smiled faintly. "I won't tell." When he returned to the booth, she'd left a towel there. Folded neatly. He held it for a second longer than necessary. Later that week, Daniel paid and stood to leave, then stopped. "Hey," he said. "I come here a lot." She looked up. "I noticed. If I ever overstay, just tell me." She studied him for a moment. "You don't overstay." That night, Daniel sat in the small apartment and thought about how easily routine had formed, how quickly something simple had become essential. At home, Lila still didn't speak. But when he tucked her in that evening, she didn't pull away when he kissed her forehead. It wasn't much, but it was something. And as Daniel lay awake later, staring at the ceiling, he wondered if these quiet mornings were leading somewhere, or if he was walking deeper into something he wouldn't be able to control. Either way, he'd be back at the diner tomorrow. He already knew that much. The question slipped out on a morning that felt heavier than the others. Daniel hadn't planned to say anything more than usual. He'd walked into Harbor Grill with the same quiet intention, the same practiced posture. But something about that day, maybe the gray sky pressing low over Tacoma, maybe the way Lila had refused breakfast again, had worn him thin. Elena noticed immediately. "You're quieter than usual," she said as she set his coffee down. "That's saying something," he replied, attempting a smile. She gave a soft huff of a laugh and reached for the sugar dispenser. "You want eggs today?" "Yes. Same as always." She wrote it down, then paused. "You okay?" He stared into the coffee. The surface rippled slightly from his breath. "My daughter didn't sleep," he said. "Again." Elena's pen stopped moving. "How long's that been happening?" she asked, careful, like she was stepping around something fragile. "Since a while," he said. He almost said since her mother died. He almost said since everything broke. Instead, he added, "She wakes up scared. Or doesn't wake up at all. Just lies there." Elena nodded slowly. "That's hard." It wasn't the words. It was how she said them. No pity. No attempt to wrap his pain in encouragement. Just acknowledgement. He swallowed. "Everyone keeps telling me what to do." She looked at him then. Really looked. "And does any of it help?" "No," he said. Elena tore the order slip from her pad and tucked it into her apron. "Sometimes," she said, "kids don't need fixing. They need room." Daniel frowned. "Room?" She gestured vaguely. "To be quiet. To feel safe without being pushed." He leaned back against the booth. "If I give her space, I'm afraid she'll disappear." Elena didn't answer right away. She walked away to the kitchen, then came back with his plate and set it down gently. "Staying doesn't always look like talking," she said. That sentence followed him all day. That evening, Daniel tried something different. Instead of asking Lila questions she wouldn't answer, he sat on the floor outside her room. He didn't bring a book. Didn't bring his phone. He just sat there until her breathing slowed. She didn't speak. But she didn't tell him to leave either. The next morning, he came back to the diner earlier than usual. Elena noticed. "She sleep?" "A little," he said. "I sat with her." Elena nodded. "That counts." Something loosened in his chest. Over the next few days, Daniel stopped filling the silence with explanations. He stopped justifying himself. Elena never asked him what he did for work. Never asked where he lived. She asked about Lila instead. What is she like? What makes her laugh? What scares her? Simple questions. Hard answers. One morning, Elena sat across from him during a slow stretch and said, "You ever feel like you're failing even when you're trying your hardest?" Daniel laughed softly. "Every day." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Me too." He hesitated. "Your kid." She stiffened. Just for a second. "Yes," she said. "My son." Past tense. Daniel felt a warning bell go off in his mind. He didn't press. He'd learned that some doors close themselves for a reason. "Losing sleep changes you," she added. "Makes everything feel louder." "Or quieter," he said. She looked at him sharply. "Yeah, that too." That was when he realized something important. Elena wasn't just being kind to him. She understood. That afternoon, Daniel almost broke his own rule. He almost told her who he really was. He imagined her reaction. Surprise. Maybe anger. Maybe relief. He didn't do it. Instead, he said, "I don't know what I'm doing." Elena met his eyes. None of us do. A bell rang at the counter. Someone called for their check. Life moved on. As Daniel stood to leave, Elena said, "Hey." He turned. "Tomorrow," she said. "If you want, you can tell me more about her." He nodded. "I'd like that." He walked out into the cold, heart pounding faster than it should have. Because for the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't carrying this alone. And that scared him more than anything else. The confession came on a morning neither of them planned for it. The diner was unusually quiet. No rush of construction workers. No cluster of retirees arguing over the newspaper. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft scrape of Elena's shoes against the floor as she wiped down a table that didn't really need it. Daniel sat in his usual booth, but he wasn't reading, wasn't watching. His hands were wrapped around his coffee, though he hadn't taken a sip. Elena noticed that too. "You didn't drink it," she said as she approached. "That's new." He looked up, startled, like she'd pulled him back from somewhere far away. "Sorry? Just thinking." She set the coffee pot down. "About her?" "Yes." Elena slid into the seat across from him. Not all the way in. Just enough to rest her elbows on the table. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." "I know," he said. "But I do." He took a breath, then another. The words didn't come easily. They felt heavier than anything he'd said out loud in months. "She used to talk all the time," he began. "Wouldn't stop, actually. Asked questions about everything. Even things I didn't have answers for." Elena smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar." "Then one day, she didn't," Daniel said. "Not really. And I keep waiting for the moment she comes back. Like I just missed a switch." Elena didn't interrupt. "I don't know if I'm doing the right things," he continued. "Or the wrong ones. Or if it even matters anymore." "That's not true," she said quietly. "It always matters." He nodded, but his eyes stayed on the table. "What if I already messed it up?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something?" "Please." She glanced toward the kitchen, then back at him. "My son used to wake up screaming." Daniel's head snapped up. "Used to." She swallowed. Her jaw tightened like she was bracing for impact. "Yeah." The words sat between them, heavy and final. "He was 5, she continued. Had these nightmares he couldn't explain. I'd sit on the floor next to his bed until he fell asleep again. Some nights, that was all I did." Daniel's chest ached. "What happened?" Elena exhaled slowly. "I lost him." The diner felt suddenly too small. "I'm sorry," Daniel said immediately. Too quickly. Like the words could cushion the truth. She nodded once. "Car accident. 3 years ago." She didn't cry. She didn't look away. But something in her eyes went distant, like she'd stepped into another room only she could see. "I shouldn't have said that," she added, standing abruptly. "I don't usually." "It's okay," Daniel said. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted, then stopped herself. She sat back down, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I don't talk about him. Not because I don't miss him. Because once I start, it doesn't stop." Daniel nodded. "I understand." She looked at him, then really looked like she was measuring whether he meant it. "When he was scared," Elena said softer now, "I learned that talking made it worse. I had to just be there. Breathe with him. Let him know I wasn't leaving." Daniel felt tears burn behind his eyes. He blinked them back. "That's what you're doing," she said. "Even if it doesn't feel like it." He swallowed hard. "Some nights I just sit outside her room. I don't say anything." Elena's lips pressed together. "Then you're doing more right than you think." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elena stood. "I need to get back to work." "Of course," Daniel said, though he didn't want the moment to end. She paused, then added, "Thank you. For listening." "Thank you," he replied. "For trusting me." She nodded and walked away, her steps measured again, controlled. But Daniel noticed her shoulders were tighter than before. The rest of the day passed in a blur. That evening, Daniel sat outside Lila's room like he always did. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel too loud. He leaned his back against the wall and closed his eyes. From inside the room he heard something faint. Not a word. A sound. A small broken hum. Daniel held his breath, afraid to move. And in that moment he realized something had changed, not just with Lila but with him. He wasn't alone in this anymore. What he didn't know yet was how fragile that connection was, or how easily it could be tested by the truth he was still hiding. They didn't talk about the future. Not that first week after the confession. Not the second either. It was an unspoken agreement, formed without words, like both of them understood that naming things too early could break them. Still, something shifted. Daniel noticed it in the way Elena lingered a few seconds longer at his table. In the way she asked about Lila without sounding cautious anymore. In the way silence between them stopped feeling like a gap and started feeling like rest. One morning after he paid, Daniel didn't stand up right away. "Elena," he said. She looked over her shoulder. "Yeah. Would you want to have dinner sometime?" The words hung there, simple and exposed. She didn't answer immediately. She wiped her hands on her apron even though they were already clean. "I don't date customers." "I figured," he said quickly. "I can stop being one." That made her pause. She studied his face like she was looking for something beneath it. "One dinner," she said finally. "That's it." He smiled. Not relief. Gratitude. One dinner. They met 3 nights later at a small Italian place not far from the diner. It wasn't fancy. Paper napkins. Candles that flickered unevenly. Daniel chose it on purpose. Elena arrived first. She wore a dark blue dress that looked like it had lived a life before this night. Her hair was down, framing her face in a way that felt more vulnerable than any smile. "You look nice," Daniel said as he slid into the chair across from her. "So do you," she replied, then added, "You clean up better than I expected." He laughed. A real one. It surprised them both. They talked about ordinary things. Favorite foods. Places they'd lived. Movies neither of them finished because life got in the way. Daniel avoided details. Elena didn't push. When the waiter asked if they wanted dessert, Elena shook her head. "I should get home." "Of course," Daniel said. "Thank you for coming." She hesitated. "I had a good time." "So did I." On the walk to their cars she said, "This doesn't change anything." "I know," he said. But it did. They didn't call it dating. They met when schedules allowed. Coffee after her shift. A walk along the water once, where they stood side by side watching ferries drift past without needing to comment on the view. Daniel told her more about Lila. About the way she lined her toys in careful rows. About how she still slept with the hallway light on. Elena listened like these details mattered. One evening, sitting on a bench overlooking the docks, Elena said, "Has anyone ever just sat with her?" Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "Not therapy. Not questions. Not games with goals," she said. "Just presence." He thought of the nights on the floor outside Lila's room. "Sometimes." "Try it more," Elena said. Without waiting for something to happen. That night, Daniel sat inside Lila's room for the first time. On the floor, his back against the bed. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stayed. Lila didn't react. But she didn't leave either. Over the next weeks, Elena became part of his routine in small, careful ways. She never came to the house. Never asked to. She respected the boundary without being told. Then one afternoon Daniel asked, "Would you like to meet her?" Elena stopped walking. "When?" she asked. "When you're ready." She exhaled slowly. "Okay." The first meeting was quiet. Lila stood half-hidden behind Daniel's leg, her fingers gripping the fabric of his pants. Elena didn't crouch. Didn't wave. She simply sat on the floor with a box of crayons she'd brought and began to draw. Minutes passed. Then Lila edged closer. Elena slid a crayon toward her without looking. Lila picked it up. Daniel felt something crack open inside him. From then on, Elena came by more often. She cooked simple meals. Let Lila help. Never corrected. Never praised excessively. She sang softly while washing dishes, old songs Daniel didn't recognize. One night, long after Elena left, Daniel stood in the hallway outside Lila's room. From inside he heard a whisper. Not clear. Not loud. But unmistakably human. He leaned against the wall, shaking. The next morning, Daniel woke with hope and fear twisting together in his chest. Because things were working. And he knew from experience how dangerous that could be. Somewhere beneath the calm, the lie he wore every day felt thinner than ever. And he couldn't tell if it was about to fall away on its own, or be torn from him completely. The whisper didn't come again the next night. Or the one after that. Daniel tried not to chase it in his mind, but it followed him everywhere. Into meetings, into traffic, into the quiet moments when hope grew teeth and bit back. He told himself it didn't matter. That progress was never a straight line. Still he watched Lila more closely. She hummed while lining up her shoes one afternoon. Soft, almost rhythmic. When she noticed him watching, she stopped immediately and turned her face away. I wasn't, he began, then stopped himself. No pressure. Elena's voice echoed in his head. Just presence. So he sat on the couch and picked up a book, pretending to read while really doing nothing at all. That evening, Elena came by with groceries. Lila stayed in her room, door half open. She's been quieter, Daniel said as they unpacked. Elena nodded. That's not always a step backward. He looked at her. It feels like one. Elena closed the fridge gently. Healing doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it hides. Later, while Elena cooked, Daniel leaned against the counter. There's something I haven't told you. She didn't stop chopping. You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to. I know. But I want to. She waited. There's a reason I didn't want help before, he said. A reason I didn't let anyone in. Elena finally looked up. Daniel? I'm not the man everyone thinks I am, he said quickly. Not completely. Her eyes softened, but there was caution there too. No one is. He swallowed. There are things about Lila's past, things I signed off on. Decisions I made because I thought they were right. Or because they were convenient. Elena set the knife down. Are you saying she was hurt? Yes, he said. By systems. By people I trusted. By me. The silence stretched. I didn't mean to, he added, voice breaking. But intention doesn't undo damage. Elena stepped closer, not touching him yet. Is she safe now? Yes, he said immediately. Completely. Then that's where we start, Elena said. With what is true now. He nodded, but the weight didn't lift. That night, Lila had a nightmare. Daniel heard the thud first, small feet hitting the floor, then a cry sharp and raw, cutting through the house like glass. He was at her door in seconds. She was curled in the corner, hands over her ears, rocking. It's okay, he said softly, sitting a few feet away. I'm here. Her breathing was frantic. She didn't look at him. He stayed. Minutes passed. Then more. Finally, her rocking slowed. In a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, Don't let them take me. His chest caved in. No one is taking you, he said, steadying his voice with everything he had. I promise. She shook her head. You promised before. The words landed like a verdict. Daniel couldn't speak. He understood then, fully, painfully, that the lie wasn't just something he carried. It lived in her too. In the places where trust had been built and broken by the same hands. In the morning, Elena found him sitting at the kitchen table, eyes hollow. She talked, he said. Elena froze. What did she say? Daniel told her. Elena closed her eyes. Then the past is closer than you think. What do I do? He asked. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. You stop hiding. He looked at her sharply. If the truth comes out. It already lives in her, Elena said gently. The question is whether you'll let it live in the dark. That afternoon a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a familiar logo at the top, an agency Daniel hadn't thought about in years. At the bottom one line stood out. We need to discuss Lila's case. Immediately, asterisk asterisk. Daniel felt the room tilt. The past hadn't just caught up. It had knocked on the door. And this time it wasn't asking permission. Daniel didn't tell Elena about the letter right away. He folded it once. Then again. Slid it into the drawer beneath the coffee maker, as if paper could be silenced by wood and screws. The logo lingered in his mind anyway, sharp as a bruise you keep pressing to check if it's still there. He spent the rest of the afternoon pretending to work. Lila sat at the dining table coloring, her tongue peeking out the corner of her mouth in concentration. She was drawing a house. Not the big one they lived in now, but a smaller one. Crooked windows. A single tree beside it. Daniel recognized it immediately. The temporary housing unit. The one he'd approved years ago when the foundation was overloaded and funding was tight. He'd never stepped inside it himself. He just read reports. Looked at numbers. Signed his name. You remember that place? He asked carefully. Lila's hand froze. She didn't look up. It smelled funny, she said. Daniel nodded even though she couldn't see it. Yeah. After dinner, Elena stayed longer than usual. She helped Lila with homework, laughed when Lila corrected her spelling, let herself lose at a card game without making it obvious. Daniel watched from the doorway, a tightness in his chest he didn't name. When Lila finally went to bed, Elena turned to him. You're quiet, she said. Just tired. Elena studied his face. That's not it. He considered lying again. The habit was well worn. Comfortable in the worst way. Instead, he opened the drawer and handed her the letter. She read it once. Then again. Her jaw tightened. They don't usually send letters. I know. So something triggered this, she said. A review. A complaint. Or a mistake. Daniel exhaled. I was hoping it would stay buried. Elena met his eyes. You don't sound surprised. I'm not, he said. I'm just afraid of what digging will uncover. Daniel, she said quietly, what exactly did you sign? He sat down heavily. There was an incident, he said. A staff shortage. One background check delayed. A report flagged but not escalated. And Lila? Elena asked. She was there, he said. Not the only one. But yes. Elena's voice stayed steady but her eyes darkened. Did someone hurt her? Daniel closed his eyes. Not physically. Not in the way reports count. But she was left alone. Repeatedly. Overnight once. With strangers cycling in and out. No consistent caregiver. No one who stayed. Elena's hand curled into a fist. That can do damage. I know, he said. I know now. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. What are you going to do? Elena asked. They want a meeting, he said. Tomorrow. And you didn't tell me because? Because if this comes out, he said, it won't just be my reputation. It could reopen her case. She could be reassessed. Elena stood slowly. You mean taken? Potentially, he said. If they decide I'm unfit. Or compromised. Elena's voice sharpened. And you thought hiding this would help? I thought buying time would. She shook her head. Time for what? For her to heal, he said. For things to be stable. Elena crossed the room, stopping a few feet from him. Stability built on silence isn't stability. It's a pause before impact. That night, Daniel barely slept. He replayed old meetings in his head. Emails. Margins he'd signed without reading the fine print closely enough. He thought about the way Lila flinched at raised voices. The way she needed routines like oxygen. Morning came too fast. He dressed carefully, choosing clothes that looked modest, neutral, forgettable. Elena drove him. They didn't talk much on the way. The building was smaller than he remembered. Less glass. More concrete. A place designed to feel temporary but somehow permanent in its wear. A woman met them in the lobby. Late 40s. Tired eyes. Clipboard hugged to her chest. "Mr. Harris," she said. "Thank you for coming." Daniel nodded. "This is Elena." The woman glanced at her, then back at Daniel. "We'll be discussing matters related to Lila. Only legal guardians are permitted." Elena stepped forward. "I'm part of her daily care." "I'm sorry," the woman said. "Policy." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be quick." Elena's eyes searched his. He saw worry there. And something else. Resolve. Inside the conference room, another man waited. Younger. Crisp suit. Tablet open. "We've reopened Lila's file," he said without preamble. "New information has come to light." Daniel's pulse thudded in his ears. "What information?" The man tapped his screen and turned it slightly. On it was a photograph. Lila. Younger. Sitting alone on a mattress on the floor. Eyes wide. Watching the door. Daniel's breath caught. "We believe," the man said, "that you knew more than you disclosed." The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence. And Daniel realized this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about whether the truth would cost him his daughter. Again. Daniel stared at the photo longer than he should have. The room felt smaller with it on the screen. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, loud enough to be annoying, too quiet to distract him. Lila's younger face stared back at him from another life. Her hair uneven like someone had cut it in a hurry. Her knees pulled to her chest. A plastic cup beside her, half full of water. "That picture," Daniel said slowly, "was never included in the official report." "No," the younger man replied. "It wasn't." The woman with the clipboard closed the door gently and took a seat. The sound of the latch clicking shut made Daniel's shoulders tighten. "Who took it?" Daniel asked. The man glanced at the woman. She answered. "A night staff member," she said. "One who quit 2 weeks later." "Why wasn't it escalated?" Daniel asked, already knowing the answer he didn't want. "It was," she said. "Just not far enough." Daniel leaned back in his chair. The memories pressed in. Late nights. Budget meetings. The pressure to keep facilities open with less funding. The praise he'd received for streamlining oversight. He swallowed. "You approved a temporary waiver," the younger man said. "It allowed reduced supervision overnight. That waiver was meant to last 30 days. It lasted 4 months. Daniel closed his eyes. "I trusted the reports." "That trust," the woman said carefully, "is part of what we're reviewing." Daniel opened his eyes again. "Are you saying I deliberately ignored this?" "We're saying," the man replied, "that you were in a position to know more. And now that you are her guardian, that conflict matters." "Conflict," Daniel echoed. "Or accountability?" Neither answered right away. Finally, the woman spoke. "Mr. Harris, we're not here to punish you. But we do need to ensure Lila's placement is safe. Emotionally and structurally." "She's safe," Daniel said. "She's thriving." "We don't dispute that," the man said. "But safety isn't just the present. It includes how the past is processed." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So what does this mean?" "It means," the woman said, "we'll need to speak to Lila." Daniel sat forward. "Absolutely not. It would be a child-centered interview," the man said. "A trained specialist. Non-leading questions." "No," Daniel repeated. "She doesn't even remember that place clearly." The woman glanced at her clipboard. "Children remember more than we think. Even when they don't have words for it." Daniel stood up. You will not drag her back into something she's just starting to move past. The man remained seated. You don't get to decide that alone. Silence stretched again. Daniel took a breath and forced himself to sit back down. What are my options? The woman hesitated. Full cooperation would be advisable. And if I don't? The younger man's tone shifted slightly. Then we reassess guardianship. Daniel felt the room tilt. I adopted her, he said. Legally. Yes, the woman said. But adoptions can be reviewed under exceptional circumstances. Daniel ran a hand over his face. This isn't about her. This is about covering institutional failure. The man didn't deny it. Sometimes it's about both. When Daniel finally left the building, his hands were shaking. Elena stood as soon as she saw him. What happened? They want to talk to Lila, he said. Her face drained of color. Interview her? Yes. She exhaled sharply. No. That's not okay. They say it's necessary. Elena stared at the building behind him. Necessary for who? Daniel didn't answer. They drove in silence again. Traffic crawled. A siren wailed somewhere far off, fading as quickly as it came. At home, Lila was sitting on the floor, lining up toy animals by size. She looked up when they walked in. Did you find what you were looking for? She asked. Daniel crouched in front of her. Maybe. How was school? She shrugged. Mrs. Collins was gone. We had a substitute. Did that bother you? Elena asked gently. Lila nodded. She didn't know our rules. Daniel's chest tightened. That night, after Lila fell asleep, Elena sat at the kitchen table with a notebook open. I've been meaning to tell you something, she said quietly. Daniel looked up. What? She hesitated. I didn't meet Lila for the first time at the diner. His heart skipped. What do you mean? Elena folded her hands. I volunteered at a family transition center years ago. Part-time. Nights. Daniel stared at her. Which center? She swallowed. The one on Maple Ridge. The same one. Daniel's voice came out hoarse. You never said anything. I didn't know it was her, Elena said quickly. Not at first. But when I saw her again, I recognized the way she watched doors. Daniel stood slowly. How long have you known? Elena met his eyes. Long enough to know this isn't the first time she's being pulled back. The weight of that settled between them. And Daniel realized the truth they were hiding from the system was already standing inside his home. Daniel didn't sleep at all that night. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned in slow, uneven circles. Every creak of the house sounded louder than it should have. Every breath felt measured, like he was afraid of making too much noise in his own home. Elena's confession replayed in his head. Maple Ridge. The name alone tightened his chest. Just before dawn, he got up quietly and went to the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of dish soap and the cinnamon cereal Lila liked. Ordinary smells. Comforting. He poured coffee he didn't drink and stood at the counter until the sky outside began to lighten. Elena joined him a few minutes later. She looked tired. Not just sleepy but worn. You should have told me, Daniel said, not turning around. I wanted to, she replied softly. So many times. But you didn't. No, she said. Because I was afraid you'd think I stayed close to her on purpose. Daniel finally faced her. Did you? She held his gaze. At first, yes. The honesty landed harder than denial would have. I was assigned to nights, Elena continued. I wasn't supposed to bond. We were told not to. But Lila wouldn't sleep unless someone sat near the door. She didn't cry. She just waited. Daniel closed his eyes. She used to line up her shoes before bed, Elena said. Perfectly straight. If they got moved, she'd wake up. Daniel's throat tightened. She still does that. Elena nodded. I know. They stood there, the truth settling between them like dust that had finally been disturbed. You should have told the agency, Daniel said quietly. And risk being dismissed? She asked. Or worse, blamed? He didn't answer. Later that morning, Daniel made a decision he'd been avoiding. He called his attorney. By noon, papers were spread across the dining table. Old contracts, approval logs, emails printed and highlighted. Elena sat across from him, flipping through a stack with quiet focus. You didn't just approve waivers, she said. You approved staffing ratios. I know. These cuts, she said, tapping the page, they were justified as temporary. But the funding was never restored. Daniel rubbed his temples. I trusted the board. Elena looked up. You were the board. The words stung because they were true. That afternoon, Daniel picked Lila up from school himself. He rarely did it. His schedule usually didn't allow for it. She spotted him immediately and ran over, backpack bouncing. You're early, she said. I wanted to be, he replied. They walked to the car together. Can I ask you something? Lila said once they were inside. Of course. She stared out the window. If someone asks me questions, I don't have to answer everything, right? Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Why would someone ask you questions? She shrugged. Sometimes grown-ups do that. They smile too much. His heart thudded painfully. No one's asked you anything yet. But they might, she said. Daniel swallowed. If they do, you can tell me. Or Elena. You don't have to say anything you're not ready to. She nodded, satisfied. Too satisfied. That evening there was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find the woman from the agency standing on the porch. Same clipboard. Same tired eyes. Mr. Harris, she said. We need to speak. About what? Daniel asked. She glanced past him toward the living room where Elena and Lila were working on a puzzle. We've discovered a discrepancy, she said, regarding a former volunteer at Maple Ridge. Elena froze mid-piece. Daniel stepped outside and closed the door behind him. What discrepancy? He asked. The woman lowered her voice. Elena wasn't just a volunteer. She was listed as a temporary caregiver during a staffing gap. Daniel's pulse spiked. That's impossible. She told me. She may not have known, the woman said. The designation was automatic. Daniel's mind raced. What does this mean? It means, she said carefully, that her involvement with Lila began earlier than disclosed. And that creates a new set of questions. Daniel's chest tightened. About what? The woman met his eyes. About intent. Before he could respond, the front door opened behind him. Elena stood there, calm but pale. You don't need to ask him, she said. Ask me. The woman turned, surprised. Elena stepped onto the porch. Whatever you think you're uncovering, she said evenly, you're missing the most important part. And what's that? The woman asked. Elena glanced back into the house where Lila was peeking around the corner, watching. That she chose us, Elena said. Not the other way around. The woman's expression didn't change, but her grip on the clipboard tightened. And Daniel knew in that moment, the next move wouldn't be theirs to make. The agency didn't come back the next day. That silence felt worse than pressure. Daniel kept expecting the phone to ring, the knock to come again, a certified letter to appear in the mailbox. Instead, there was nothing. No emails. No follow-ups. Just a pause that felt deliberate. Elena went to work like nothing was wrong. She braided Lila's hair in the mornings, packed lunches, reminded her about spelling tests. The routine stayed intact, but something underneath it had shifted. Daniel could feel it in the way Elena checked the windows before bed, the way she listened when cars slowed outside the house. On the third day, Daniel broke. He drove back to Maple Ridge alone. The building looked smaller than it had in the photograph. Beige siding. Faded sign. A playground with one swing missing its seat. The place had been repurposed now, officially a short-term family stabilization unit. Different name. Same bones. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. A receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "I used to oversee this facility," Daniel said. "I'm looking for old records. From about 7 years ago." She hesitated. "Those would be archived." "I know." She studied him for a moment, then picked up the phone. "I'll see what I can do." He waited in a chair bolted to the floor, the kind designed to discourage comfort. Children's drawings still lined the walls. Smiling suns. Stick figure families. One of them had a door colored black. A man in his 60s eventually appeared. Gray hair. Tired posture. "You're Daniel Harris," he said. Daniel stood. "Yes. I remember you," the man said. "You didn't visit often." Daniel didn't argue. They went to a small office in the back. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling, labeled in faded marker. "What exactly are you looking for?" the man asked. "Night logs," Daniel said. "Staff schedules. Incident reports that weren't escalated." The man sighed. "That was a rough period. That's why I'm here." Hours passed. Daniel flipped through papers until his fingers were dusty and dry. He saw his own signature more times than he wanted to count. Then he found it. A handwritten note stapled to a shift log. "Child placed in room C unusually withdrawn. Repeatedly asked if the woman with the quiet voice would be back." No name attached. Just a date. The same week Elena had said she was assigned nights. Daniel's chest tightened. "Is there anything else?" the man asked. Daniel hesitated. Was there ever an internal complaint about a volunteer becoming too attached? The man looked at him carefully. "There was concern," he said, "but not about harm." "Then about what?" "About consistency," the man replied. "The child calmed when she was present, and became distressed when she wasn't." Daniel swallowed. "What was done?" "Nothing," the man said. "We didn't have enough people to rotate." Daniel nodded slowly. When he left Maple Ridge, his hands were shaking. That evening he laid everything out on the table at home. The note, copies of logs, the waiver approvals. Elena read silently. When she finished, she sat back in her chair. "So they knew?" "Yes." "And they let it happen?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. "Then they're not trying to protect Lila. They're trying to protect themselves." Daniel nodded. "Which means they'll shift blame if they can." Elena looked up. "Including onto me." "Or me," Daniel said. "Or both." Lila came into the room holding her stuffed rabbit. "Why are there papers everywhere?" she asked. Daniel smiled gently. "Grown-up stuff." She nodded, then looked at Elena. "Are you going to leave?" Elena froze. "No," she said immediately. "Why would you think that?" Lila shrugged. "People who help don't always stay." Daniel felt something crack open inside him. Elena knelt in front of Lila. "I'm not going anywhere." Lila studied her face carefully as if measuring the truth of it. That night, Daniel's attorney called. "The agency is preparing a formal review," she said. "They're also requesting depositions." Daniel closed his eyes. "For who?" "You," she said. "And Elena." "And Lila?" There was a pause. "Not yet." Daniel exhaled. But the attorney continued. "There's something else." "What?" "They're framing Elena's early involvement as potential grooming." Daniel's blood ran cold. "That's absurd." "I agree," she said. "But it's a narrative." Elena met Daniel's eyes across the room. She could see it on his face. "They're going to make me the problem," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "I won't let them." Elena gave a sad smile. "You might not get to choose." The house felt too quiet after Lila went to bed. Daniel sat alone in the living room, staring at the wall. He understood now. The agency wasn't deciding whether Lila was safe. They were deciding who to sacrifice to make the past disappear. And the clock had started ticking. The deposition notice arrived in a plain white envelope. No logo. No warmth. Just dates, times, and language stripped of empathy. Daniel read it twice before handing it to Elena. She didn't flinch. She just nodded once like she'd been bracing for it. "They want me first," she said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not accidental." "No," she agreed. "They want to set the tone." The attorney met them the following afternoon in a small office overlooking a parking garage. The blinds were half closed, casting long stripes of shadow across the table. "They're building a timeline," she said. "Not of harm. Of influence." Elena leaned forward. "Influence isn't abuse." "I know," the attorney said. "But they'll imply it. They'll ask why you were there so often. Why the child responded to you. Why you stayed in her life after leaving the center." Daniel clenched his hands. "Because she needed someone." The attorney nodded. "That's the truth. But truth has to be proven." The day of Elena's deposition, Daniel waited in the hallway. He listened to the muted sounds through the door. Voices rising and falling. Long pauses. When Elena finally came out, she looked smaller somehow. Like something had been taken from her. "They asked me if I planned it," she said quietly. "Planned what?" "Meeting her again. Becoming part of her life." Daniel's chest tightened. "What did you say?" "That I didn't plan to," she said. "But I hoped." That night, Daniel sat with Lila while she did her homework. "Do you ever think about the place you lived before here?" he asked gently. She didn't look up. "Sometimes." "What do you remember?" She tapped her pencil against the paper. "Doors. And shoes." Daniel swallowed. "Anything else?" She hesitated. "There was a lady who talked soft. She smelled like laundry." Daniel felt his breath hitch. "Do you remember her name?" he asked. Lila shook her head. "But I knew when she wasn't there." That answer stayed with him. The agency moved quickly after the deposition. They requested school reports, therapy notes, even pediatric records. Elena's work hours were cut without explanation. "They said it was scheduling," she told Daniel. "But it's not." "They're isolating you," he said. "Us," she corrected. Daniel filed his own deposition response 2 days later. They questioned his leadership, his judgment, his motives for adopting. "You chose her," one of the agency attorneys said. "Out of hundreds." Daniel's voice stayed steady. "She chose me." They exchanged glances. That night, Elena found Daniel sitting on the edge of the bed, shoes still on. "I keep thinking," he said, "that if I'd read one report more carefully." Elena sat beside him. "You can't rewrite it." "No," he said. "But I can stop them from rewriting it into something ugly." The next morning, Daniel received a call from an unfamiliar number. "This is social services," a voice said. "We're conducting a routine wellness check." Daniel's pulse jumped. "On who?" "Lila," the voice replied. "When?" "This afternoon." Elena overheard. Her face went pale. "They're escalating," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "And they're testing us." The caseworker arrived at 4. She was polite, professional. She asked about routines, school, bedtimes. Lila answered carefully, sitting close to Elena. At one point, the caseworker asked, "Do you ever feel unsafe here?" Lila looked at Daniel. Then Elena. "No," she said. "But you felt unsafe before?" the woman pressed. Elena inhaled sharply. Daniel intervened. "That question isn't appropriate." The caseworker smiled thinly. "It's my job." After she left, Lila went to her room without a word. Later that night, Elena sat on Lila's bed brushing her hair. "Are you scared?" Elena asked softly. Lila nodded. "They're asking too many questions." Elena's voice stayed calm. "You don't have to answer anything you don't want to." Lila whispered, "What if they make you go away?" Elena's hand stilled. "I'm here," she said. "And I'm not leaving." But when Elena came back into the hallway, Daniel could see the doubt in her eyes. They both understood now. This wasn't about facts anymore. It was about pressure. And pressure breaks people in different ways. The call came just after midnight. Daniel was half asleep on the couch, the television muted, a legal brief open on his chest. His phone buzzed once on the coffee table. Then again. He knew before he picked it up. "This is social services," the voice said. Different from the last one. Firmer. Less polite. "We've received a concern." Daniel sat up. "About what?" "About Elena," the woman replied. "Specifically, her proximity to Lila and the nature of their bond." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That bond is called care." "Care becomes a concern," the woman said, "when boundaries are unclear." "They are very clear," Daniel snapped. "You've seen our home. Our routines." "Nevertheless," she said, "we're recommending a temporary adjustment." The word adjustment hit him like a punch. "What kind of adjustment?" he asked. "A cooling-off period," she said. "Elena should step back from primary caregiving while we complete the review." Daniel stood up. "You're asking her to leave." "We're asking for space," the woman replied calmly. "For the child." "No," Daniel said. "You're asking to destabilize her." There was a pause. "This isn't a request, Mr. Harris." When the call ended, the house felt hollow. Daniel walked down the hallway slowly, like the floor might give out if he moved too fast. He stopped outside Lila's room. The door was cracked open, a sliver of light spilling out. Elena was sitting on the bed, whispering to Lila, her hand resting lightly on her back. Lila looked up when Daniel appeared. "Who was that on the phone?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Elena's eyes met his. She knew. "They want me gone," she said quietly. Lila sat up. "Gone where?" Elena swallowed. "Just, not here for a little while." Lila's face changed instantly. Her shoulders stiffened. Her fingers curled into the blanket. "No," she said. Elena forced a gentle smile. "It's not forever." Lila shook her head harder. "They always say that." Daniel felt his chest tighten painfully. "They can't make you," Lila said, her voice rising. "You didn't do anything wrong." Elena wrapped her arms around her. "I know, sweetheart." Daniel stepped forward. "We're going to talk to our lawyer in the morning. No one's doing anything tonight." But the seed had already been planted. Lila didn't sleep after that. Neither did Daniel. By morning the house felt brittle. Every sound felt sharp. Every movement felt watched. The attorney called at 9. "They're pushing for separation," she said. "Temporarily. They're framing it as harm prevention." "That will harm her," Daniel said. "I agree," the attorney replied. "But they're betting you won't fight it publicly." Daniel stared out the window. "They're wrong." Elena packed a bag anyway. Not because she agreed. Because she knew the cost if they escalated further. "I'll stay with my sister," she said quietly, folding clothes with steady hands. "Just for a few days." Daniel shook his head. "You shouldn't have to do this." She looked at him. Neither should Lila. When Elena told Lila, it didn't go the way either of them expected. Lila didn't cry. She didn't yell. She went very still. "Okay," she said flatly. That scared Daniel more than anything else. Elena knelt in front of her. "I'll call every night." Lila nodded once. "Okay. You can come visit," Elena added. "We'll make a schedule." Lila nodded again. Too calm. Too controlled. When Elena left, the door closing behind her sounded final in a way that made Daniel's stomach twist. That evening, Lila lined up her shoes by the bed. Perfectly straight. She moved them twice to make sure the edges matched. Daniel watched from the doorway. "Do you want to talk?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Talking makes things happen." He sat beside her anyway. Later that night, Daniel found her awake, staring at the ceiling. "Are you mad at me?" she asked suddenly. "No," he said quickly. Never. You let them take her, Lila said. The words were quiet, precise. Daniel's throat closed. I'm trying to keep you safe. She turned her head toward him. From who? He didn't have an answer. The next morning the agency sent a follow-up email. They wanted to extend the separation. Indefinitely. Daniel felt something harden inside him. He called his attorney back immediately. They're not stopping, he said. So neither am I. What are you thinking? She asked. Daniel looked at the stack of documents on the table. The logs. The notes. The signatures. I'm thinking, he said slowly, it's time the truth stops being private. As if on cue his phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. If you push this public, we'll reassess custody. Daniel stared at the screen, his pulse pounding. In the other room, Lila carefully moved one shoe slightly out of line. Then froze as if waiting to see what would happen next. Daniel didn't reply to the message. He stared at it for a long time, then locked his phone and placed it face down on the table, as if that could keep the threat from spreading. Across the room, Lila was sitting on the rug, taking the shoes she'd lined up and rearranging them again. One slightly forward, one slightly back. Her fingers hesitated between movements, like she was testing how much disorder the world would tolerate. Daniel knelt beside her. You don't have to fix everything, he said gently. She didn't look at him. If I don't, something bad happens. The words were quiet, certain. Daniel felt a surge of anger, sharp and focused. Not at Lila. At himself. At the agency. At the years of polite decisions that had led here. That afternoon he made calls he'd avoided for a long time. Not to friends. Not to donors. To journalists. Not the loud ones. The careful ones. The kind who asked for documents before opinions. By evening, two had called him back. You're making serious allegations, one of them said. Institutional neglect. Retaliation. I'm bringing evidence, Daniel replied. Not allegations. He scanned the room as he spoke. Lila was watching television, but her eyes kept flicking toward him. Once this is public, the journalist warned, you lose control of the narrative. Daniel lowered his voice. I already have. That night Elena called. Her voice sounded tired but steady. They contacted my employer. Daniel closed his eyes. What did they say? That I might be under investigation, she replied. They didn't say for what. Just enough to make people nervous. I'm sorry, he said. I know, she replied. Listen. Lila didn't talk much on the phone tonight. Daniel's chest tightened. What did she say? That she was being good, Elena said. And that being good makes people come back. Daniel gripped the phone harder. You are coming back. I know, Elena said. But she doesn't. After the call, Daniel sat alone at the table. He pulled out the logs again. This time he noticed something he hadn't before. A pattern. Several nights where coverage dropped below minimum didn't just overlap with Elena's shifts. They clustered around the same weeks. The same supervisors. The same approval codes. One name appeared repeatedly. Not Elena's. A regional director. Someone higher than Daniel had been at the time. Daniel felt a cold clarity settle over him. The agency wasn't protecting children. They were protecting hierarchy. The next morning, Lila refused to go to school. She stood by the door, backpack on, not crying, not arguing. Just not moving. They ask questions there, she said. Daniel crouched in front of her. Your teacher cares about you. She smiles like the other ones, Lila replied. Daniel inhaled slowly. You don't have to go today. Relief flickered across her face, then was quickly buried under something else. Will they be mad? She asked. No, Daniel said firmly. I won't let anyone be mad at you for feeling safe. The doorbell rang an hour later. Two people stood on the porch. One was the familiar caseworker. The other was a man Daniel had never seen before. Tall. Gray suit. No clipboard. This is unannounced, Daniel said flatly. It's urgent, the man replied. We need to speak with you and the child. No, Daniel said. You don't. The man smiled politely. Mr. Harris, we're concerned that your actions are escalating the situation. My actions? Daniel asked. Or your fear of exposure? The caseworker shifted uncomfortably. We have reason to believe, the man continued, that your home environment may be influencing the child's perceptions. Daniel laughed once. It sounded sharp even to his own ears. You mean she's reacting like a child who's been destabilized repeatedly? We're recommending, the man said, a temporary placement while we reassess. Lila stepped into view behind Daniel. Her hand slipped into his. No, she said. The man glanced down at her. This won't be for long. She looked up at Daniel. They say that. Daniel felt something inside him snap into place. He stepped fully into the doorway, shielding her with his body. She's not going anywhere, he said. If you try to remove her without a court order, I'll have cameras, witnesses, and a lawsuit filed within the hour. The man's smile faded slightly. We can get a court order, he said. Daniel nodded. Then do it. There was a long pause. Finally, the caseworker spoke. We'll be in touch. They left. Daniel closed the door slowly and leaned against it, heart pounding. Lila wrapped her arms around his waist. Are you going to leave too? She asked. He knelt and held her tightly. No. And neither is Elena. I promise. For the first time in days, Lila cried. That evening, Daniel's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a link. A draft headline sent by the journalist. State agency accused of retaliation after billionaire adopts child from facility he once oversaw. Daniel stared at the words. Above it was a single message. Once this runs, there's no going back. Confirm? Daniel looked down the hallway toward Lila's room, where Elena's sweater still hung on the back of the door. He typed one word. Yes. And as he hit send, he knew the next chapter wouldn't be fought quietly anymore. The article went live just before dawn. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, refreshing the page every few minutes, watching the headlines spread from one site to another. By the time Lila woke up, his phone was vibrating constantly. Messages from reporters. From former colleagues. From people he hadn't heard from in years. And then, finally, from the agency. A single line. We need to talk. Daniel ignored it. Elena called as soon as the story broke. I saw it, she said. It's everywhere. Are you okay? Daniel asked. I got put on unpaid leave, she replied. But, people are asking questions. That's new. Outside, a news van was already parked down the street. Daniel closed the blinds. They're going to be angry, Elena said. They already were, he replied. Lila wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. Why are there cars outside? She asked. Daniel hesitated. Some people want to tell our story. Which story? She asked. The one where you're loved, he said. She nodded as if that made sense. By noon, the agency issued a statement. It was bland, careful, full of words like concern and cooperation. But it didn't deny the documents. That afternoon, Daniel's attorney called, almost breathless. They're scrambling, she said. We've had 3 internal sources reach out. One of them has emails. What kind of emails? Daniel asked. Ones that show they knew Maple Ridge was understaffed, she said, and that they ordered managers not to escalate reports. Daniel closed his eyes. The truth was finally starting to surface. Then the knock came. Daniel opened the door to find a different caseworker. Younger. Nervous. I'm here to conduct a follow-up, she said. Do you have a court order? Daniel asked. She shook her head. Then you're not coming in, he replied. She hesitated. There's been guidance. From who? Daniel asked. She looked down at her clipboard. From above. Daniel crossed his arms. Tell above they can talk to my attorney. She left without another word. Inside, Lila sat on the couch watching cartoons. Did they come to take me? She asked. No, Daniel said. Did Elena come back? She asked. Not yet, he replied. But she will. That evening Elena called again. I got a message, she said quietly. From someone at the agency. Daniel's pulse quickened. What did it say? They want me to sign something, she said. A statement. Saying my time at Maple Ridge was inappropriate. That I overstepped. Daniel clenched his jaw. And if you don't? They implied I'll never work in child care again. Daniel felt a wave of anger. That's coercion. I know, she said. But they're scared. Daniel looked at Lila curled up on the couch, hugging her rabbit. Elena, he said, don't sign anything without my attorney. I won't, she replied. But they're going to keep pushing. They can't hide anymore, Daniel said. There was a pause. Daniel, Elena said softly, what if this hurts Lila more? Daniel closed his eyes. It already did. Silence was what hurt her. That night, a new article dropped. Former Maple Ridge caregiver speaks out. Elena hadn't spoken, but someone had. Daniel read every line. It confirmed what they already knew. Children left overnight. Records altered. Complaints buried. Lila stood in the doorway as he finished reading. Are they in trouble? She asked. Yes, Daniel said. Good, she replied quietly. He knelt in front of her. Why do you say that? Because, she said, maybe they won't make kids wait anymore. Daniel felt his eyes burn. The next morning, the agency requested an emergency court hearing. They were no longer pretending. This wasn't about reviews or wellness checks. It was about who would control the story, and who would get to keep a little girl who had already lost too much. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Daniel held Lila's hand as they walked through security. She wore her favorite sweater, the one Elena had bought her, sleeves a little too long. Every time the metal detector beeped for someone else, she flinched. Elena met them inside. She hadn't been back in the house yet, not officially. But seeing her there, in a simple blue coat, made something in Lila's posture soften. She didn't run. She just walked a little faster. Hi, Elena said softly. Lila stepped into her arms without a word. The agency's attorneys were already seated when they entered the courtroom. So was the regional director Daniel had seen in the logs. A man with careful eyes and a calm that felt rehearsed. The judge was older. No nonsense. She flipped through a thick file as everyone took their seats. This hearing, she said, concerns the temporary placement of a minor child. Daniel felt Lila squeeze his hand. The agency spoke first. They used words like instability and undue influence. They avoided saying Elena's name, referring to her only as the unrelated caregiver. Daniel's attorney countered with documents. Logs. Emails. Photos. This child was left alone, she said. Repeatedly. And when she finally formed a bond with a caregiver who made her feel safe, the agency tried to erase that connection to protect itself. The judge's eyes narrowed. Elena was called to testify. She spoke calmly. About nights on folding chairs. About quiet voices. About how Lila lined up her shoes. I didn't plan to be in her life, Elena said. But when she slept. The agency attorney tried to twist it. You sought her out later, he said. Elena met his gaze. I recognized her. And that didn't concern you, he pressed. That she needed someone, she replied. No. Daniel was called next. He didn't soften anything. I failed her once, he said. I won't do it again. The regional director took the stand. He denied everything. Until Daniel's attorney pulled up the emails. Direct orders not to escalate. Budget memos. Silence fell over the room. The judge leaned forward. This court, she said slowly, does not look kindly on retaliation disguised as child welfare. The agency attorney stiffened. The judge turned to Daniel and Elena. I'm not making a permanent ruling today, but I am ordering that Elena be allowed to resume contact immediately. Lila gasped softly. And, the judge continued, that the child remain in her current home pending further review. Daniel felt his chest loosen for the first time in weeks. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Daniel shielded Lila as cameras flashed. Is she safe now? Someone shouted. Daniel didn't answer. Elena bent down and whispered to Lila, I'm coming home. Lila nodded, pressing her face into Elena's coat. But as they left the building, Daniel noticed something. The regional director was on his phone, eyes hard. The fight wasn't over. It had just moved into daylight. And daylight, Daniel knew, made some people more dangerous. Elena came back to the house that night. Not quietly. Not secretly. She walked through the front door with her overnight bag in one hand and a court order in the other. Lila stood frozen for half a second, like she didn't quite trust what she was seeing. Then she ran. Elena barely had time to drop the bag before Lila crashed into her arms. No words. Just breath and fabric and the soft sound of someone holding on too tight. Daniel watched from the doorway, his chest aching in a way that felt almost good. They let Lila decide what to do next. She chose spaghetti for dinner, even though it wasn't planned. She chose to eat on the couch. She chose to watch an old cartoon with Elena leaning against her. Small choices, but they mattered. The news kept playing quietly in the background. Another agency spokesperson. Another careful statement. Daniel muted it. Later, after Lila went to bed, Elena and Daniel sat at the kitchen table again. They won't stop, Elena said. No, Daniel agreed. But they won't be able to pretend anymore. Elena rubbed her hands together. My sister got a call. Someone asking about me. Digging. Daniel's jaw tightened. They're trying to discredit you. I know, she said. They'll say I was too attached. That I crossed lines. Daniel looked at her. You didn't. Elena met his eyes. That doesn't mean they won't say I did. The doorbell rang. Both of them froze. Daniel stood slowly and looked through the peephole. A woman stood on the porch. Not from the agency. A reporter. We're not doing interviews, Daniel called through the door. It's not an interview, she said. I have something you need to see. Daniel hesitated, then cracked the door. She handed him a manila envelope. Someone left this on my desk. Daniel took it. What is it? Elena asked. Daniel opened the flap and pulled out a stack of printed emails. His breath caught. They were from the regional director. To agency legal. Dated weeks before the story broke. Subject: containment strategy. Daniel Harris is a liability. If he pushes, we neutralize his credibility by highlighting his prior oversight failures and questioning the caregiver's motives. Elena closed her eyes. They planned it, she whispered. Yes, Daniel said. And now we have proof. The reporter nodded. We're running this tomorrow. Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from the agency. We can make this go away. Daniel stared at the screen. In the other room, Lila laughed softly in her sleep. Daniel typed back one word. No. He handed the reporter the envelope. Run it, he said. As she left, Elena took Daniel's hand. Whatever happens next, she said, we face it together. Daniel nodded. Outside, a car idled at the end of the street, headlights off. Someone was still watching. And that meant the story wasn't done yet. The next morning, the story exploded. Every major outlet picked it up. The emails. The containment strategy. The proof that the agency had planned to intimidate, isolate, and discredit anyone who stood in their way. By noon, lawmakers were calling for investigations. By evening, the regional director had been placed on administrative leave. Daniel watched it all unfold from the living room, the television muted, Lila sitting beside him with Elena's arm around her. Are they still mad? Lila asked. Daniel smiled softly. They're being held responsible. That word meant nothing to her, but the tone did. Elena received another call from her employer, this one different from the last. They reinstated me, she said quietly after she hung up. With back pay. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. That afternoon their attorney called with one more update. The agency has withdrawn its request for separation, she said. And they've agreed to a permanent protective order keeping Elena in Lila's life. Daniel closed his eyes. Elena covered her mouth. Lila looked between them. Is that good? It's very good, Elena said, kneeling in front of her. It means I get to stay. Lila stared at her for a long moment. Then she reached out and held Elena's hand. Okay, she said. Not relief. Not celebration. Just acceptance. Later that evening, Daniel and Elena sat on the back steps while Lila played inside with her toys. I kept thinking, Elena said softly, that the truth might cost us everything. Daniel nodded. It almost did. But it didn't, she said. No, he replied. Because Lila finally had someone who wouldn't go quiet. Inside, Lila was lining up her animals. But this time she left one out of place. Just a little. And she didn't rush to fix it. Daniel noticed. So did Elena. They didn't say anything. They just smiled. Because sometimes healing doesn't look like happiness. Sometimes it looks like a child finally believing the world won't fall apart if things aren't perfect. If this story moved you, if you felt something for Lila, Daniel, and Elena, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And if you want, share in the comments where you're watching from. Because stories like this don't just end. They keep going.